The Galactic underestimated humanity's army, until the battlefield spoke the massive crystalline dome of the Galactic Council's judgment chamber glittered like a captured star above the gathered representatives of 1,000 worlds. Admiral Eleanor Reed stood alone on the central platform, her weathered face illuminated by harsh alien lights. Behind her, Earth's holographic image hovered, a small blue marble against the vastness of space. Humans, rumbled High Arbiter Dosmek, his translucent appendages rippling with bioluminescent contempt. Your species has been granted observer status for 3 standard cycles. Now you petition for full military alliance rights? Murmurs and clicks of derision echoed through the chamber. Eleanor's voice remained steady. Earth requests equal standing in the defense pact against the Void Swarm incursion. The Arbiter's compound eyes flashed. Your species controls 8 planets. The Zalvian Empire commands 400. The Meridian Collective spans 3 galactic arms. What could humanity possibly contribute to our combined military might? A holographic display activated, showing the devastation of the Arcturus colony. Smoking ruins and twisted metal where a thriving settlement once stood. The latest Void Swarm attack. The swarm adapts too quickly to your standardized tactics, Eleanor said. Earth's military history is built on asymmetric warfare, on improvisation, on turning disadvantage into victory. Primitive notions, dismissed Dosmek. The Council forces operate on quantum-locked strategic algorithms, perfected over millennia. Eleanor's eyes narrowed. And yet the swarm breaches your defenses with increasing frequency. The chamber erupted in indignant chatter. The Arbiter raised an appendage for silence. Very well, Admiral Reed, the Council will test your claims. 1 battle, 1 chance to prove humanity's worth. Eleanor nodded, her face betraying nothing, but as she turned to leave, a small holographic alert flashed at her wrist. It was a message from General Marcus Thorne on the front lines. Swarm advancing toward Proxima Centauri. Estimated arrival 36 hours. Council fleet responding too slowly. This is it, Eleanor. The battlefield they've given us. Her lips curved into the barest hint of a smile as the chamber doors closed behind her. The Council had just made their first mistake. They had allowed humans to fight on their own terms. Admiral Reed walked briskly through the gleaming corridors of the Council headquarters, her footsteps echoing against polished stone that had been quarried from 100 different worlds. She was joined by her aide, Lieutenant Jackson, who struggled to match her pace. They gave us Proxima Centauri, she said, not slowing down. They think it's a death sentence, Jackson frowned. 37 ships against a swarm incursion? It might be, Admiral. They've run the numbers through their precious algorithms, calculated our defeat to 16 decimal places. Eleanor reached a secure communication booth and stepped inside. But numbers aren't everything. The booth sealed around them, cutting off all external surveillance. Eleanor activated the quantum-encrypted channel to Earth. Madam President, she said when the connection stabilized, we have our battlefield. President Rivera's face appeared, lines of concern etched around her eyes. Proxima? That's the staging ground for half the refugee evacuations in that sector. Precisely why the swarm is targeting it, and precisely why the Council expects us to fail. Eleanor transmitted the tactical data from her wrist device. The Council thinks we'll attempt to match their conventional doctrine, deploy in standard formations, meet the swarm head-on. And what will we do instead? The President asked. We'll remind them why humans were feared long before we reached the stars. Eleanor's eyes gleamed with the light of ancient warriors. I need full authorization for Operation Hornet's Nest. There was a long pause. The simulations for that strategy projected 30% casualties among our forces. The Council's simulations for a conventional defense project 90% casualties and complete loss of the Proxima colonies, Eleanor countered. I'm not asking for permission to win, Madam President. I'm asking for permission to win our way. President Rivera nodded slowly. Authorization granted, Admiral. Make them remember this day. The connection terminated and Eleanor turned to Jackson. Send word to General Thorne, implement Phase 1 immediately. What about the Council observers? They'll report our unconventional tactics. Eleanor smiled thinly. Let them watch. It's time they learned what they've invited into their galaxy. 12 hours later, Eleanor stood on the observation deck of the Council's Strategic Command Center. Around her, representatives from 24 species monitored the approaching conflict with clinical detachment. Their sensor arrays showed the Void Swarm, a seething mass of biomechanical horrors, converging on Proxima Centauri. The swarm moved like a living cloud, individual units linked by a hive mind that could process information faster than most supercomputers. Council Admiral Zeltor, a towering insectoid with gleaming ceremonial armor, gestured dismissively toward the display. Your forces are deploying in a scattered formation. This violates basic defensive doctrine. They will be isolated and destroyed. Eleanor said nothing, watching as Earth's small fleet spread across the Proxima system in what appeared to be random patterns. To the Council's tacticians, it looked like madness or desperation. Would you like to recall your forces? Zeltor offered, mandibles clicking in what passed for amusement among his kind. The Council could take command and perhaps salvage— No, Eleanor said quietly. We will handle this our way. On the displays, the swarm encountered the first line of human defenses, not warships, but a field of seemingly derelict mining vessels and ancient satellites. The Council observers murmured in confusion. Such debris would be no obstacle to the swarm. Then the debris field ignited. Hundreds of micro-singularity mines, technology the humans had claimed was still theoretical, detonated in sequence. Each created a momentary gravitational lens that fractured the swarm's formation, not destroying them but separating them from their networked consciousness for precious seconds. In those seconds, Earth's warships struck from multiple vectors, targeting not the largest clusters but specific nodes identified by Dr. Layla Kapoor's breakthrough algorithm. The human vessels moved in unpredictable patterns, accelerating and decelerating in ways that defied efficient energy use, but made them nearly impossible to track. What is this? Demanded Zeltor. Their targeting makes no sense. Eleanor watched as her forces executed the battle plan drawn from centuries of human conflict. We're not targeting their strongest points or their largest concentrations, she explained. We're targeting their communication network. Breaking their unity. Impossible, another observer scoffed. The swarm's neural network cannot be mapped. We've tried for decades. You looked for patterns in their communication, Eleanor said. We looked for patterns in their adaptation. The swarm learns from each encounter. We cataloged every battle they've fought, identified their learning algorithms, and predicted how they would evolve against conventional forces. On the display, the human fleet continued its seemingly chaotic dance, striking and retreating in ways that baffled the Council observers, but clearly confused the swarm as well. For every adaptation the collective intelligence developed, the human forces had already shifted tactics. This is not warfare, Zeltor protested. This is improvisation. Precisely, Eleanor said with quiet pride. That's humanity's greatest weapon. We've spent our history fighting each other, adapting to overcome superior forces through creativity and unexpected approaches. Your civilizations have known peace for so long that your warfare has become ritualized, predictable. The battle continued for hours, a complex game of move and counter-move. The human fleet suffered losses, painful ones, but the swarm was being systematically dismantled, its adaptive advantages neutralized by an enemy that refused to follow recognizable patterns. When the final swarm units were destroyed or scattered, a stunned silence fell over the observation deck. What had seemed like certain defeat had become an improbable victory. You've won a skirmish, Zeltor finally said, his tone less dismissive than before. But the swarm will learn from this. They will adapt. So will we, Eleanor replied. That's what humans do best. As she turned to leave, Eleanor knew this was just the beginning. The Council had underestimated humanity's potential contribution to the galactic defense. Now they would watch more carefully, perhaps with fear as much as respect. Either way, the battlefield had spoken, and the galaxy was listening. The galactic underestimated humanity's army. Until the battlefield spoke, General Marcus Thorne stood on the bridge of the Earth fleet ship Indomitable, watching as his modest fleet of 37 warships moved into position around Proxima Centauri. Through the view screen, he could see the Council observation vessel hovering at a safe distance. No doubt they were already drafting reports of humanity's impending failure. Swarm will exit hyperspace in approximately 20 minutes. General, reported Lieutenant Commander Reese from the tactical station. Her fingers danced across the holographic controls as she finalized the deployment of their forces. Marcus nodded grimly. And our observers? Commander Jekyll of the Zalvian Empire leads the Council delegation. They're maintaining position just outside the combat zone. Of course they were. The Council had no intention of risking their own ships in what they considered a doomed demonstration. The Void Swarm numbered in the thousands, a writhing mass of biomechanical horrors that had already devoured 3 frontier worlds in the past cycle. Against them stood 37 human warships in a desperate plan. Status of Operation Hornet's Nest? Marcus asked. Micro-singularity mines deployed in patterns based on the Fibonacci sequence. Modified civilian vessels are in position to act as decoys. Neural disruptors are charged and ready. Marcus activated the fleet-wide communication channel. All ships, this is General Thorne. The Council believes they've set us up to fail today. They've given us impossible odds to prove we don't belong at their table. He paused, letting his words sink in. But humanity has faced impossible odds before. We don't win by playing the same game as our enemies. We win by changing the rules. From the tactical station, Reese announced, "Hyperspace rupture detected. Swarm incoming." The view screen filled with a horrifying sight. Thousands of swarm units emerging like a cloud of metal locusts, their biomechanical forms shifting and connecting as they sensed their prey. At the edge of the display, the Council observation vessel adjusted its position, ensuring a good view of the imminent slaughter. "Begin Phase 1, ordered Marcus. The human fleet, instead of forming the standard defensive sphere the Council doctrine demanded, split into 7 smaller groups. To an outside observer, particularly one trained in the Council's quantum-locked battle algorithms, it appeared to be a fatal error. Divide and be conquered. On the Council observation vessel, Commander Jekyll chittered in derision. They split their forces, he noted to his aides. The primitives don't even understand basic tactical principles. But as the swarm surged forward, they encountered the first surprise. The field of seemingly derelict mining vessels and satellites that humans had scattered throughout the system suddenly activated, each one emitting electromagnetic pulses in a pattern based on ancient Earth music. Bach's fugues translated into binary code. The pattern made no logical sense, but it created a momentary confusion in the swarm's hive mind. In that confusion, the first wave of micro-singularity mines detonated. Each created a minute gravity well that lasted for mere seconds, but in those seconds, portions of the swarm were pulled apart from the whole. Their neural network temporarily fragmented. Phase 2, Marcus commanded. Dr. Layla Kapoor, a civilian scientist who had volunteered for this mission, activated her experimental technology from a secured lab at the heart of the Indomitable. "Neural disruptors firing," she reported, targeting the fragmented sections first. The disruptors fired invisible pulses that mimicked and then distorted the swarm's own communication frequencies. It was like introducing a stutter into a conversation, not enough to stop it, but enough to create confusion and delay. "They're adapting already," Reese warned. "Swarm units are changing frequencies." "As expected," Marcus replied calmly. "Switch to pattern Delta." The human vessels began an elaborate dance through space, accelerating and decelerating in ways that defied efficient energy use, but made them nearly impossible to predict. Each ship followed a pattern derived from game theory principles developed centuries ago on Earth, creating a complex problem that the swarm's otherwise superior processing power couldn't quickly solve. On the Council observation vessel, Jekyll was no longer chittering in amusement. "What strategy is this?" he demanded of his analysts. "Their movements correspond to no known tactical doctrine. They appear to be basing their maneuvers on ancient mathematical games," one aide replied, confusion evident in his voice. "But there's no strategic advantage to—" He stopped as the human fleet suddenly converged from 7 directions simultaneously, targeting what appeared to be random swarm units. But these weren't random at all. They were the neural nexus points that Dr. Kapoor's algorithm had identified. The crucial links in the swarm's adaptive network. The swarm, for the first time in recorded history, appeared to hesitate. "Phase 3, Marcus ordered, his voice steady despite the chaos of battle around them. The human fleet again scattered, but now each vessel released dozens of automated drones. These small, agile craft were programmed with contradictory objectives and random variables, creating a battlefield so complex that the swarm couldn't process a unified response. "Sir," Reese called out, "the Indomitable's port shield is failing. 3 swarm capital units are converging on our position." Marcus nodded. Right on schedule. Deploy the Trojan horse. From the Indomitable's launch bay, a single shuttle emerged. It appeared damaged, leaking radiation. The perfect target for the resource-hungry swarm. As predicted, the 3 capital units diverted to intercept this seemingly easy prey. The shuttle detonated as they surrounded it, releasing an experimental compound developed in Earth's laboratories, a molecular key that temporarily locked the swarm's adaptive nanotech in its current configuration, preventing further evolution for precious minutes. Throughout the battle, the human forces suffered losses. 3 destroyers were completely overwhelmed. The cruiser Defiant lost all power and drifted, its crew fighting in darkness against swarm boarders. The Indomitable itself took heavy damage to its port side, but the swarm was suffering unprecedented casualties. Their superior numbers meant little against an enemy that refused to engage them directly, that struck at their weaknesses rather than testing their strengths. 4 hours into the battle, the remaining swarm units began to retreat, pulling back through hyperspace rifts in a disorganized withdrawal that none in the Council had ever witnessed before. On the bridge of the Indomitable, exhausted crew members looked to their general in disbelief. "Did we just win?" asked Reese, her voice hoarse from shouting orders. Marcus allowed himself a small smile. "We did what humans have always done. We refused to fight on our enemy's terms." The communication system chimed. "General," said the communications officer, "Commander Jekyll is requesting permission to board." "Granted," Marcus replied. "Let's see what the Council makes of this." 20 minutes later, the Zalvian commander stood on the bridge of the Indomitable, his chitinous form towering over the human officers. His compound eyes seemed to be having difficulty focusing, as if he couldn't quite process what he had witnessed. "Your tactics," Jekyll began, mandibles clicking rapidly. "They violated every principle of strategic doctrine." "Yes," Marcus agreed simply. "You suffered 22% casualties. We projected 30%. We outperformed our estimates." Jekyll's antennae twitched in what might have been irritation. "You could not possibly have known which swarm units to target. Our best analysts have tried for decades to map their neural network." Dr. Kapoor stepped forward, her small frame dwarfed by the alien commander. "We didn't try to map their entire network. We looked for patterns in their adaptation, the way they learn and evolve during battle. Then we designed a targeting algorithm based on information theory and chaos mathematics." "Impossible," Jekyll insisted. "Such an approach would require a species that spent its entire history fighting itself," Marcus interrupted. "Developing tactics not against logical, predictable foes but against others who think and adapt just as they do. Humanity's greatest strength isn't our technology, Commander. It's that we've been preparing for this kind of warfare since before we knew the stars had names." Jekyll was silent for a long moment. When he spoke again, his tone had changed. "The Council will want a full report on your methods." "Of course," Marcus replied with a diplomatic smile. "We'll provide everything, though I suspect some of our approaches may be difficult for the Council to implement." As Jekyll departed, Reese moved to stand beside her general. "You think they'll actually listen, or will they dismiss this as luck?" Marcus watched the Council vessel through the viewport as it prepared to depart. "Some will call it luck. Others will recognize the threat we pose, not to them, but to their comfortable assumptions about warfare. Either way, the galaxy just changed. In the darkness of space, the damaged human fleet began the process of recovery, gathering their wounded and repairing what they could. They had won a single battle against impossible odds, but the war was far from over, and in the Council chambers, the debate about humanity's place in the galactic order was about to become much more interesting. For the galactic underestimated humanity's army until the battlefield spoke. The Galactic Council chambers hummed with tension as Admiral Eleanor Reed stood once again on the central platform. This time, however, the murmurs that rippled through the gathered representatives weren't entirely contemptuous. There was a new tone, uncertainty, perhaps even grudging respect. High Arbiter Dosmek's bioluminescent appendages pulsed with a more subdued rhythm as he addressed the assembly. "The human forces have successfully defended Proxima Centauri against a void swarm incursion," he announced. "This unexpected outcome warrants further discussion." Across the vast chamber, thousands of eyes, optical sensors, and other alien sensory organs focused on Eleanor. She stood tall, her military uniform bearing the scorch marks from a recent visit to the damaged EFS Indomitable. She had insisted on seeing the aftermath of the battle firsthand before returning to face the Council. "Admiral Reed," the Arbiter continued, "the Council acknowledges your tactical victory. However, questions remain about the sustainability and reproducibility of your methods." From his elevated position among the Meridian delegates, Vox Prime leaned forward. Unlike most Council representatives, the ancient being had no need for a translation device. His species had evolved the ability to process and reproduce any language they encountered. "Let us speak plainly." Vox Prime's voice echoed through the chamber. "The humans won a single skirmish using unorthodox tactics that violated centuries of established military doctrine. This proves nothing except their willingness to take dangerous risks." Eleanor kept her expression neutral despite the anger bubbling beneath her surface. "The established doctrine has failed to halt the swarm's advance for the past 7 years. Sometimes risks are necessary when survival is at stake." Vox Prime's lipless mouth stretched into what might have been a smile. "Indeed. The Council appreciates your enthusiasm. So much so that we have decided to grant humanity a greater role in the defensive alliance." Eleanor felt a warning prickle at the base of her neck. This sudden change in attitude seemed too convenient. "Earth forces will be assigned to defend the Epsilon sector," announced the Arbiter. "This will allow you to demonstrate your methods on a larger scale." A subtle shift in the chamber's atmosphere told Eleanor everything she needed to know. Several representatives exchanged glances. Others deliberately avoided eye contact. The Epsilon sector was widely considered a strategic backwater, far from the main front of the conflict with the swarm. "We accept this responsibility," Eleanor replied carefully, "and request full access to all intelligence reports concerning Epsilon sector." "Of course," Vox Prime said smoothly. "All standard protocols will be followed." As the session adjourned, Eleanor was approached by Nixar, the representative of the Talari Confederation. The avian being's feathered crest rippled with color patterns that Eleanor had learned to recognize as concern. "Admiral," Nixar said quietly, falling into step beside her in the corridor, "be wary. The Epsilon assignment is not what it appears." "I suspected as much," Eleanor replied, keeping her voice low. "What can you tell me?" "Nothing directly. I am bound by Council confidentiality." Nixar's four-fingered hand briefly touched Eleanor's arm. "But if I were coordinating defense for a supposedly unimportant sector, I might pay particular attention to long-range sensor data from the past 3 cycles." Before Eleanor could press for more information, the Talari representative moved away, seamlessly joining a group of other delegates. In the Earth Embassy on the Council homeworld, Diplomatic Officer Raj Anand scrolled through the official intelligence briefings on Epsilon sector. To most observers, he appeared to be doing routine preparatory work. In reality, he was conducting a careful comparison between the data provided to Earth and the fragments he had managed to access from restricted Council archives. The door slid open, admitting Eleanor. She looked exhausted but alert, the lines around her eyes deeper than when she had first arrived on this world. "Tell me what you found," she said without preamble. Raj gestured to his displays. "They're hiding something. The official reports show minimal swarm activity in Epsilon for the past year, a few scout vessels, nothing more. But I've detected redactions and modifications when comparing these to reference copies in the general database." "Can you recover the original data?" Raj shook his head. "Not directly, but I've been building relationships with the technical staff from some of the more flexible Council races." He lowered his voice. "The Talari and the Grun have both expressed private concerns about the Council's handling of the swarm threat." Eleanor considered this. "The Talari representative approached me after the session, suggested I look at long-range sensor data. That fits with what I've pieced together." Raj highlighted several points on his display. "If you look at shipping route changes, refugee movements, and resource allocation shifts, a pattern emerges. Something has the Council worried about Epsilon, despite their public dismissal of its strategic importance." "They're setting us up to fail," Eleanor said, the realization crystallizing. "They're expecting a major swarm incursion, and they're positioning humanity to take the blame when defenses collapse. Or," Raj suggested carefully, "they're giving us a chance to prove ourselves without risking more valuable territories." Eleanor's laugh was short and bitter. Always the diplomat, Raj, but you don't believe that any more than I do. No, he admitted. But I've confirmed that several moderate council factions are watching our progress with genuine interest. Not everyone shares Vox Prime's view of humanity as dangerous upstarts. Eleanor moved to the window, looking out at the impossibly tall spires of the council capital. The ancient city stretched to the horizon, representing power accumulated over millennia. Humanity was the newest player in a game whose rules had been established long before Earth had discovered fire. "We need to prepare, Captain Wallace," she said finally. "Her flotilla will be walking into a trap." Captain Diana Wallace stood on the bridge of the EFS Dauntless, leading the small Earth flotilla assigned to Epsilon Sector. The ship still smelled of fresh paint and new circuitry, one of the newest in Earth's rapidly expanding fleet. Around her, the crew worked with the efficiency that had become the hallmark of Earth's military since first contact with the wider galaxy. "Approaching Epsilon Prime, Captain," reported her navigator. "Standard orbit in 5 minutes." "Very good." Diana turned to her executive officer, Lieutenant Commander Ayato Nakamura. "Any updates on those sensor anomalies?" Ayato's fingers moved across his console with practiced precision. "Still inconsistent with the Council intelligence briefing, Captain. If these readings are accurate, swarm activity in this sector is significantly higher than reported." Diana nodded, unsurprised. Admiral Reed's encrypted message had warned them to trust their own instruments over Council reports. "Continue passive scans. Let's not alert anyone that we're seeing through their deception." "The Council observer vessel is requesting permission to dock," announced Communications Officer Frost. "Commander?" Tulok of the Grun Hegemony. Diana exchanged a glance with Ayato. The Grun were among the more pragmatic council races, less bound by tradition than many. Was this significant or mere coincidence? "Permission granted," she replied. "Prepare a suitable welcome." 30 minutes later, Diana faced the massive form of Commander Tulok in the Dauntless's conference room. The Grun stood nearly 3 meters tall, his gray skin textured like weathered stone. Despite his intimidating appearance, his species was known for their straightforward approach to diplomacy. "Captain Wallace," Tulok rumbled, "I bring the Council's formal authorization for your operations in Epsilon Sector." Diana accepted the data crystal he offered. "We appreciate the Council's confidence in Earth's defensive capabilities." Something like amusement flickered in Tulok's 4 eyes. "Yes, the Council has great expectations for your performance here." "And what are your personal expectations, Commander?" Tulok was silent for a moment, as if weighing his response carefully. "I have studied the records of your battle at Proxima Centauri. Your methods are unorthodox but effective. I am curious to see if they can be adapted to different circumstances, such as a major swarm assault instead of the minor incursions described in our briefing," Diana asked bluntly. The Grun's expression didn't change, but a low rumble emanated from his chest, what passed for laughter in his species. "You are direct, Captain, a trait my people share with humans." He leaned forward slightly. "I can neither confirm nor deny information beyond your official briefing. I am bound by Council protocols." "Of course," Diana replied. "Just as I am bound to protect this sector with all available means." "Indeed." Tulok straightened. "I will observe your operations from my vessel, as mandated by the Council. Be assured that my reports will be accurate." After the Grun commander departed, Diana called her senior officers together. "It seems we have confirmation, albeit indirect, of our suspicions. Epsilon Sector is facing a significant threat that the Council has deliberately downplayed in our briefing." "Why?" asked Chief Engineer Rodriguez. "What did they gain by setting us up to fail?" "Control of the narrative," Ayato suggested. "If human tactics fail here, they can dismiss our victory at Proxima as luck rather than superior strategy." Diana. The Galactic underestimated humanity's army, until the battlefield spoke. The alert klaxons shattered the routine quiet of the EFS Dauntless's bridge. Captain Diana Wallace was already moving toward the tactical station before the automated announcement finished. "Swarm vessels detected," reported Lieutenant Commander Ayato Nakamura, his fingers flying across the holographic controls. "Multiple hyperspace ruptures at the edge of the Epsilon system." Diana's expression remained calm despite the surge of adrenaline. "Numbers?" "Initial count shows 300 capital units and approximately 2,000 support craft." Ayato looked up, his face grim. 3 times larger than the force at Proxima Centauri, Captain. And exactly as we predicted, Diana said quietly. She opened the fleet-wide communication channel. All Earth vessels, this is Captain Wallace. Implement Protocol Thermopylae immediately. This is not a drill. Across the small flotilla of 15 human warships, crews moved with practiced efficiency. They had been drilling for this scenario since their arrival in Epsilon Sector 3 weeks ago. Everyone aboard knew they were facing overwhelming odds, and that the Council was watching, expecting them to fail. The Council observer, "Vessel is hailing us," announced Communications Officer Frost. "Commander Tulok is requesting information on our defensive strategy. Tell him we're implementing standard Council doctrine with minor adaptations," Diana replied. "Then activate the gravitational lensing array." On the main view screen, the approaching swarm appeared as a seething mass of biomechanical horror. Thousands of units connected by a hive intelligence that adapted with terrifying speed. Behind them, barely visible at the edge of sensor range, the Council observation fleet hovered at a safe distance. No longer just Commander Tulok's vessel, but a full diplomatic contingent led by Vox Prime himself. They had come to witness humanity's failure. Diana intended to give them a very different show. "Gravitational lensing activated," reported Chief Engineer Rodriguez from Engineering. "Dr. Okonkwo's calculations are holding steady." Across the vast emptiness of space, invisible distortions began to form. The experimental technology, developed by Earth physicist Dr. Victor Okonkwo, created artificial choke points in the fabric of space-time itself. The swarm, unable to detect these subtle warps, began to funnel into narrower corridors of approach. "They're taking the bait," Ayato noted. "Swarm formation is compressing into the projected vectors," Diana nodded. "Launch the mirror network." From the launch bays of each Earth vessel, hundreds of autonomous drones deployed. Unlike conventional weapons platforms, these small devices were programmed with randomized human thought patterns, creating a chaotic information environment that confused the swarm's predictive algorithms. On the Council observation vessel, Vox Prime watched with growing unease as the tactical situation developed. "The humans are not engaging directly," he noted to his aides. "They appear to be hurting the swarm." "Impossible," scoffed one of his advisors. "Their fleet is too small to influence the swarm's movement." Yet the evidence on their scanners was clear. The massive swarm force was not dispersing to surround the human ships as expected. Instead, they were converging along specific vectors as if drawn by unseen currents. "Enhance our scans," Vox Prime ordered. "I want to know exactly what they're doing." Back on the Dauntless, Diana moved to Phase 2 of their plan. "All vessels execute attack pattern Delta 6. Precision strikes only. Target the nexus points identified by Dr. Kapoor's algorithm." The Earth flotilla broke from their defensive posture, each ship accelerating along seemingly random vectors. To an observer trained in conventional tactics, it appeared chaotic, perhaps even desperate. But every movement was carefully calculated, based on game theory principles that human strategists had refined over centuries of warfare against other creative, adaptive minds. "The Council fleet is moving," Ayato reported suddenly. "They're entering the combat zone." Diana frowned. This wasn't part of the plan. "Hail, Commander Tulok!" The Grun commander's stone-like face appeared on the communications screen. "Captain Wallace," he rumbled. "Vox Prime has ordered our fleet to assist you against the overwhelming swarm force." "We appreciate the gesture," Diana replied carefully, "but our tactical approach requires precise coordination. If you could hold position at—" "The Council has determined that standard battle protocols must be implemented," interrupted another voice as Vox Prime himself appeared in the transmission. "Your unorthodox methods, while admirable in a smaller engagement, cannot possibly succeed against a force of this magnitude." Diana fought to keep her expression neutral. This wasn't assistance, it was sabotage. By implementing standard protocols, the Council fleet would disrupt the careful patterns the human forces had established. "Sir," she said with forced calm, "I must respectfully request that you withdraw to safe distance. Our defensive strategy is specifically designed for—" "Your request is noted, Captain," Vox Prime cut her off. "However, the Council cannot allow Epsilon Sector to fall due to experimental tactics. We will take primary command of this engagement." The transmission ended abruptly. They're deploying in standard defensive formation, Ayato reported. Directly between our forces and Nexus Point Gamma 3. Diana's mind raced. The Council's intervention threatened to unravel their entire strategy. If the swarm broke free from the gravitational corridors before the human fleet could target the critical nexus points, new approach, she decided. Signal all ships, we're accelerating the timeline. Full power to the disruptor arrays. We'll hit all primary targets simultaneously. The energy surge will be detected by the Council fleet, warned Rodriguez. They'll know we're not following standard protocols. That's a political problem for later, Diana replied. Right now we need to win this battle despite our allies' help. Throughout the human flotilla, power systems were redirected to experimental weapons designed by Earth's finest minds. As the Council fleet moved to engage the swarm using traditional formation tactics, the human vessels executed a series of maneuvers that appeared to be a full retreat. On the Council flagship, Vox Prime allowed himself a cold smile. As expected, he told his advisors. When faced with true danger, the humans abandoned their unconventional approach and flee. Commander Tulok was not so certain. Their movement patterns appear too coordinated for a simple retreat, he observed. And their power signatures are showing unusual spikes. Meaningless readings, dismissed Vox Prime. Focus on implementing the Council battle doctrine. We will demonstrate how a properly executed defense should function. As the Council fleet engaged the leading edge of the swarm, they encountered the usual adaptive response. The swarm quickly analyzed their formation, identified the patterns in their attack vectors, and began to counter them with horrifying efficiency. It was a familiar dance that had played out in countless battles across the galaxy, one that usually ended with Council forces in retreat after inflicting minimal damage. What was not familiar was the sudden surge of energy from the supposedly retreating human ships. Each vessel, now positioned at specific coordinates around the battlefield, activated their disruptors simultaneously. The carefully calibrated frequencies, all different, all changing according to mathematical patterns designed to confound prediction, sliced through the swarm's neural network. Now, Diana ordered. All ships execute final strike pattern. The human flotilla converged from multiple vectors, each targeting specific swarm nexus points that Dr. Kapoor's algorithm had identified. These weren't the largest concentrations or the most heavily armed units. They were the critical communication nodes that allowed the swarm to function as a unified intelligence. The Council fleet, caught in the middle of this unexpected maneuver, found themselves in the unprecedented position of being inadvertently assisted by forces they had intended to replace. The human strikes, precise and devastating, created cascading failures throughout the swarm's neural network. For the first time in recorded history, the Void Swarm began to display signs of confusion. Individual units lost coordination with the greater whole, their movements becoming erratic and inefficient. Continue targeted strikes, Diana commanded. Focus all firepower on the remaining nexus points. Don't let them recover their network integrity. For 3 intense hours, the battle raged across the Epsilon system. The human flotilla suffered heavy damage. 2 destroyers completely lost, and the Dauntless itself taking multiple direct hits that left entire sections exposed to vacuum. But they maintained their disciplined approach, refusing to be drawn into the type of direct engagement that would favor the swarm's superior numbers. When the last major swarm contingent finally retreated through a hyperspace rift, an eerie quiet settled over the battlefield. Debris from both sides drifted through space, a silent testament to the violence that had unfolded. Status report, Diana requested, wiping blood from a cut on her forehead. A power surge had blown out a console near her position during the final phase of battle. We've lost the Intrepid and Valor completely, Ayato replied, his uniform scorched and torn. Constellation and Defiant are heavily damaged but stable. Our own systems are operating at 63% capacity. The Galactic Council's Grand Chamber had never been so crowded. Representatives from all member species filled the tiered seating, while diplomatic observers from non-aligned worlds stood in the galleries above. News of the battle at Epsilon Sector, and humanity's unexpected role in it, had spread throughout the galaxy with unprecedented speed. Admiral Eleanor Reed stood once again on the central platform, her dress uniform bearing the formal insignia of Earth's fleet. Behind her stood Captain Diana Wallace, still showing faint scars from the battle, and diplomatic officer Raj Anand, whose quiet work behind the scenes had helped build the coalition that now watched with interest. High Arbiter Dozmek's bioluminescent appendages pulsed with complex patterns as he called the session to order. "This extraordinary session of the Galactic Council will now commence," he announced, his voice echoing through the vast space. "We are gathered to address the events in Epsilon Sector and the irregular tactics employed by Earth forces." The chamber quieted as Vox Prime rose from his seat. The ancient being moved with deliberate slowness to the speaking platform opposite Eleanor. "Esteemed colleagues," he began, "we face a grave decision. Twice now, human forces have engaged the Void Swarm using methods that directly contradict established Council military doctrine. While these engagements resulted in tactical victories, they represent a dangerous precedent." Murmurs rippled through the assembly. Vox Prime continued, his voice growing stronger. "For 10,000 cycles, the Council has maintained peace through adherence to standardized protocols. Our quantum-locked strategic algorithms have been perfected over millennia of careful development. To abandon them for the chaotic, improvisational approach of a species barely out of its planetary cradle would be foolhardy at best, catastrophic at worst." Eleanor watched the Council's reactions carefully. Some nodded in agreement, particularly representatives of the oldest civilizations. Others seemed less convinced, their attention shifting between Vox Prime and the human delegation. "The incident at Epsilon was particularly troubling," Vox Prime continued. "When Council forces attempted to implement proper defensive formations, the human fleet actively circumvented our efforts. This insubordination cannot be tolerated regardless of the outcome." "That is not an accurate characterization of events," came a rumbling voice from the Grun delegation. Commander Tulak rose, his massive form drawing all eyes. "As senior observer during the Epsilon engagement, I must correct the record." Vox Prime's expression tightened. "Commander, your official report has already been filed and incorporated into the record." "My complete report, yes," Tulak agreed. "Which states clearly that the Council intervention nearly compromised the human defensive strategy, a strategy that ultimately saved Epsilon Sector from complete swarm occupation." The chamber erupted in discussion. The Arbiter's appendages flashed brightly as he called for order. "Admiral Reed," he said when the noise subsided, "you may present Earth's position." Eleanor stepped forward, her voice clear and steady. "The Council invited humanity to prove our worth on the battlefield. We have now done so twice against overwhelming odds. Each time we employed strategies specifically adapted to counter the swarm's greatest advantage, their adaptive hive intelligence." She gestured to Captain Wallace, who activated a holographic display showing the battle at Epsilon. "Our approach is not random or chaotic, as some have suggested. It is based on principles developed throughout human history. Principles that evolve specifically to counter adaptive, intelligent opponents." The display showed the gravitational lensing array, the mirror drone network, and the precise targeting of swarm nexus points. "We did not abandon Council doctrine out of arrogance or insubordination," Eleanor continued. "We adapted because the swarm had already learned to counter your standardized tactics." Vox Prime scoffed. "A convenient claim impossible to verify." "Actually," Raj Anand spoke up, stepping forward with a data crystal, "it is entirely verifiable. With the assistance of representatives from the Talari Confederation, the Grun Hegemony, and 4 other Council races, we have compiled analytical data from the past 100 swarm engagements." He inserted the crystal into the central console, and new information appeared in the holographic display. The data shows a clear pattern. In each consecutive engagement where Council forces employed standard doctrine, the swarm's adaptation rate increased by approximately 3%. They were learning your playbook, move by move. The evidence was compelling, displayed in terms that even the most traditional Council members could understand. Statistical analysis, predictive modeling, and historical trend data all pointed to the same conclusion. The standard doctrine was becoming increasingly ineffective against the swarm's rapid evolution. "This is why we developed alternative approaches," Eleanor explained. "Not to challenge Council authority, but to counter an enemy that had already begun to overcome your defenses." A tense silence fell over the chamber as the Council members absorbed this information. Finally, Nixar of the Talari rose to speak. There is another matter we must address, the avian being said, feathered crest rippling with color. The decision to assign human forces to Epsilon Sector while withholding critical intelligence about expected swarm activity. Vox Prime's posture stiffened. A security protocol. Information is distributed on a need-to-know basis. A deliberate attempt to ensure human failure, Nixar countered. My delegation has reviewed the intelligence assessments. Epsilon was known to be a primary swarm target 3 cycles before Earth forces were assigned there. More murmurs, these with a distinctly different tone. Many council representatives turned to look at Vox Prime with new suspicion. Whether intentional or not, Eleanor interjected, keeping her voice diplomatic. The result was that Earth forces faced a swarm incursion 3 times larger than at Proxima Centauri, with less than half the ships. Yet we prevailed. At significant cost, Vox Prime noted. 2 vessels lost completely, others heavily damaged. Yes, Diana Wallace spoke up, her voice carrying the weight of command despite her junior rank among those present. We suffered losses. War demands sacrifice, but had we followed standard doctrine against that swarm force, simulations indicate we would have lost the entire fleet and Epsilon Sector with it. The Arbiter's appendages pulsed thoughtfully. This session has raised serious questions about our approach to the swarm threat. Before we proceed to formal deliberation, there is one final matter to address. He turned to Vox Prime. Counselor, explain why you ordered Council forces to intervene directly in the Epsilon engagement, contrary to the established observation protocols. For the first time, Vox Prime appeared unsettled. The human forces were clearly outmatched. Council assets in the sector were at risk if their defense collapsed. Yet Commander Tulok's report indicates your intervention nearly caused the very collapse you claimed to prevent. The Arbiter noted. This requires explanation. Perhaps, Raj suggested carefully. Some members of the Council were concerned that a second human victory would force a reconsideration of established doctrine. Doctrine that has remained essentially unchanged for 5,000 cycles. The implication hung in the air. Vox Prime's expression hardened. You dare accuse the Council of sabotage? Of placing political concerns above strategic necessity? I merely observe that resistance to change can be a powerful motivator, Raj replied diplomatically. Particularly for civilizations that measure their histories in millennia rather than centuries. The debate continued for hours, with factions forming and dissolving as different perspectives were aired. Throughout it all, Eleanor maintained her position. Humanity did not seek to replace Council doctrine, but to complement it with approaches the swarm had not yet learned to counter. Finally, the Arbiter called for order. This Council must now decide on humanity's status within the defensive alliance. We will vote on 3 resolutions: full integration of human forces with independent tactical authority, continued probationary status with restricted deployment, or removal from frontline operations entirely. The voting process was solemn and deliberate, each representative recording their position according to their species' customs. Some placed glowing crystals in ancient receptacles. Others sang their votes in harmonic tones. The newer races used modern data interfaces that translated their decisions into the Council's consensus matrix. When the results appeared in the central display, even Eleanor was surprised. By a narrow margin, the Council had voted for full integration, with a significant amendment requiring human strategists to train Council forces in their adaptive approach. It is decided, the Arbiter announced. Earth will assume a leadership role in developing new tactical doctrine to counter the swarm threat. Admiral Reed, the Council acknowledges your species' contribution and recognizes the wisdom in your unorthodox methods. Vox Prime rose once more. I formally protest this decision. The humans have fought exactly 2 engagements against the swarm. To elevate their tactical approach above protocols developed over thousands of years is not merely short-sighted, it is dangerous. With respect, Counselor, Eleanor replied, we do not seek to replace your wisdom with our own. We offer